So hey, what's up, everyone? You're currently tuned into TBD here on KCSB FM 91.9 in Santa Barbara and NetNet Radio Tijuana. We have Luke Stewart with us here. How you doing, Luke? How have you been holding up during the quarantine and stuff?
Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm very thankful to be here. Thanks for inviting me. The quarantine, COVID,
I guess
it's a
to be
roller
more specific,
coaster.
I guess, how did you like adapt as a musician? Like, how are you holding up? How do you like virtual gigs and stuff?
hmm As a musician, I would say firstly, my initial reaction in March and April and stuff was to really just take the time to reconnect with why I love music in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
It almost felt, I'll be honest, it felt um, almost reaffirming that it was still the only thing that I could think about and still had a lot of passion for, and felt inspired by the events occurring in the quarantine, COVID situation, also in the social unrest of the summer. Those things
Yeah.
I got inspiration from
Mm-hmm.
to continue making the art. So, like I said, it felt to me um, affirming in the way that, when it took me back to being a teenager, just in my room,
Mm-hmm.
uh, digging on music, listening to music and playing music and writing music, et cetera, et cetera. It really felt good, especially after years of sort of constant touring and, gigging and building and developing and all that kind of stuff. It felt good to almost not take a step back, but uh, get a good reminder of the passion of music and sound and art. Um, so that's where I take it. I found myself being inspired by this moment.
That's tight. I'm glad you were able to actually find like some inspiration from this crazy time. I feel like a lot of the musicians I talk to are just like, yeah, this isn't really a very inspiring time. It's kind of just giving me time to finish stuff up. So it's cool that you were actually able to, you know, I guess build off of that,
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
everybody's dealing with it in their own way.
mhm.
Some people, I've heard some people be like, I couldn't do anything for months, just being stuck in in different ways. And that's, like I said, everybody has to deal with it in their own way. But for me, um, I try to fight against those feelings of feeling powerless and feeling stuck, and really just allowing the natural flow, the natural inspirational flow
Mhm.
of not just this moment, but of life in general,
Yeah.
uh, to really take hold in my process, in even in just the way that I practice. It wasn't like, at the very beginning when all the work and all the gigs stopped initially, and then it was like we're on unemployment,
Mhm.
and so I'm just gonna practice every single day. Um, I, I I purposefully, consciously sort of let myself go
Mhm.
from any sort of strict regimented thing like that, and just allowed again the inspiration to dictate what it is that I do.
Mhm.
That's something that other musicians throughout time have said in interviews and et cetera, et cetera. But the thing that I found encouraging and again affirming was that once I let myself go from a feeling of needing to be regimented, that natural inspiration came often.
Mhm.
Um, so I did find myself doing a lot of music uh, alone, and also with the virtual performances.
Yeah.
And again, with the virtual performances, I've said this before, but it's not a replacement. It's not a replacement for concerts
Yeah.
or a live show. It's its own medium. And so I chose to take that perspective on the live streaming and really found a lot of great inspiration through that. For instance, there's a lot of powerful free programs for creating live streams, creating your own videos, and it's a medium that's been around for a number of years also. So it's not a new thing. It's new to me and to some people, but it's not by any form or fashion new. So it's almost like diving in to another way of creating art in a very specific medium.
That's actually so amazing to see your perspective on like live streams and stuff. Whenever I ask that question, it's usually like, yeah, I don't like it. It's not really like a replacement to, I guess, concerts and stuff. Yeah, it's actually really cool that you bring that up. It is like kind of a medium of its own, you know?
It is.
Like,
yeah. I think thinking about it like a replacement is not useful because it's not. It's obviously not a replacement for. You can't replace the live experience.
yeah.
But I think as a medium in itself, is totally viable, and there's a lot of I accept the artistic and creative challenge of engaging in live streams whenever it's necessary, and it's something that we can also incorporate if and when things get back to normal. It's something that we can reincorporate into our presentations, how we present ourselves and our art.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess before we go into the rest of the interview, I also just want to introduce my friend Maddy that's here
Hello.
with us from KCSB and NetNet joining me for the interview. They have a show of themselves on KCSB and NetNet. So
I do the show right after Thomas. We were both music directors, and somehow we ended up with slots where he interviews people, does stuff like this, and then I go and dig for more music and any of the stuff going on a lot of these tape labels.
yeah. So thanks for joining me, Maddy.
It's good
to Luke, you're DC, and I think I read New York based as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Tight. So growing up, I feel like there wasn't much going on in terms of like DIY music where I'm from, other than what like a few people were doing later on. So I like to ask this question because it varies so much by like geographic region.
Where are you from again?
Ventura County, Santa Barbara too. So
Simi Valley.
Yeah,
Simi Valley.
Yeah, I grew up in Simi Valley. Okay, so that's actually why there is no scene, because it's Simi Valley, Ronald Reaganville. So, but what was your hometown scene like, and how did your progression through it lead to your heavy involvement in places like DC? And like, how did your punk upbringings, especially with your band Laughing Band, play into this?
Let's see. So I grew up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, which is on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. So it's even more of a bleak place, I think, than Simi Valley, California. All that to say that also I think my friends and I were so isolated from any sort of, and this is something that I've said before, and it's sort of been part of the narrative, is that growing up in a place where there's no overriding like cultural force that sort of tells you what to do, that or rather you can get on track to be a part of necessarily. At the time, I felt very disadvantaged by the fact that that my friends and I weren't, part of a storied, even from our perspective, like a storied geographic location like Southern California that has this punk legacy and this everything else legacy. Again, I don't know anything about the specifics, but just from our perspective, or from the East Coast or anything like that, where there's things happening and things that you can be a part of, and almost like be told like what to do, and sort of live the life in a way that everything is kind of set out there for you in a way. My friends and I were independent in our music influences because we were from nowhere. Mm-hmm. We were able to, just go deep into listening to all kinds of music without anyone or any, culture or scene telling us like what specifically to listen to. I definitely remember there being, oddly enough, a number of good record stores in the area, in Biloxi, Gulfport, a few other places. It's also 90 miles from New Orleans, so that's a thing too. Uh-huh. That was like the closest big city. But I think the group of friends that I was with were, we were all very dedicated, independent musicians. And we sort of coalesced around the band and then the bands that we were in. First, it was a band called the Volatiles, sort of like a classic hardcore-ish style punk band. This was in high school. And I've gone back and listened to it. We were actually very good, I think. We weren't like a shitty punk band. We were actually, and then like later on that the same group of friends, we formed a bunch of different bands with different lineups and things. And then eventually, during my first year of college, which was at the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, oddly enough, I was studying in college, international studies, and I had set up an internship for myself in DC. Uh-huh. It was the same time that Hurricane Katrina happened, and that,
oh boy,
obviously destroyed the Mississippi Gulf Coast and affected a lot of things that were happening for me in Mississippi. Also the fact that I was like unhappy where I was. So I made the move to DC at that point. And then that's when I really discovered sort of the scene and the culture and the depth of music and legacy that I was always looking for in high school. Finding the elder, or finding the elder that can tell you about your history, finding the peer that you can build off of that also is a part of that legacy. Even more specifically, seeing being part of a thriving Black community, a Black arts community, being in a city that where I see Black people specifically doing well and seeming to be running things. That's something that even today is still rare. But for me, coming from a place like Mississippi, which is still the per capita the Blackest state in the United States, but it has its own dynamics, obviously. So coming to Washington D.C., I felt for the first time that affirmation of like, oh wow, I am now a part of this living legacy of Black excellence, and essentially. so through that, that's when I first was introduced to a living, again, jazz community, jazz scene.
So at this point, were you still, I guess, like involved in punk, or was it like a slow transition that you started, I guess, playing more jazz or trying to learn how to perform jazz and stuff like that?
Okay, let's see. How can I put this diplomatically? Because growing up, you know, in my real punk days in high school, I'll be honest, the Discord thing never really did it for me.
Yeah.
Like Minor Threat was cool, except for that one song that and I like encountered some actual like racists that were down with Minor Threat.
Oh boy.
You know, some like encountered like various levels of punk racism.
Yeah.
Both in Mississippi and in Washington, D.C.
Damn.
And just the overall vibe of the punk scene is lovely. Very nice folks, very good people, and obviously a strong legacy. I just thought when I finally experienced it in DC, it just wasn't what I was expecting. That's all. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
Being in Laughing Man played at my school, and I joined the band basically right then, and that's basically when that band became a real band. And you know, it's funny to call it a punk band also.
Yeah.
If you listen to it, I mean, we're definitely punk adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something else. It sounds like something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, through that experience of being in Laughing Man, you know, we played it. We were in the punk scene, but also in the indie scene and like the overall rock and roll scene of Washington D.C. And so yeah, played and interacted with all the, you know, the storied venues, the Black Cat, and you know, 930 Club later on. You know, the Positive Force shows, St. Stephen's, all these places. You know, met Ian MacKaye, went to the Discord house and had tea with Ian MacKaye a few times.
Wow.
You know, and just, you know, just part of the scene of Washington D.C. I remember also, you know, at the same time I am going to jazz clubs and playing jazz at the same time, and I remember specifically when we would be interviewed, when Laughing Man would be interviewed by sort of like local blogs and zines and things. They would be like, who's your favorite band? What's the best music coming out of Washington, D.C.? And in the twee fashion, it would be like, you know, the band of the day or whatever. And I remember saying specifically, shouting out a jazz band called the Young Lions in Washington, D.C. I'm like, well, this is the best band in D.C. right here. But like, there was like I guess many cities, the music communities are very, very segregated for a lot of reasons in Washington, D.C. And that continues, unfortunately, to today. I thought that would subside a bit, but yeah, that continues. So yeah, essentially through Laughing Man, we went through a lot of waves of music in Washington, D.C. You know, unfortunately, it's a place where people come and go, musically and otherwise. I saw a video of back when we were in Gold Leaf, which was our, like, you know, classic warehouse DIY spot where we put on shows and rehearsed and all these things in downtown Washington. downtown DC, Chinatown specifically. Yeah, I saw a video, and I couldn't see any of the people that that either even live in DC anymore or play music anymore. And that was, you know, maybe 5 to 10 years ago. I'll say a good 10 years ago. And now, you know, of all the bands that were all these it bands and, like, you know, part of the scene, it's like most of them don't even play music anymore. So that, I think that to me is it says a lot about the scene.
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to cast like too much of a negative light, because there were also some, I mean, there are some amazing people in that community that have gone on to do other things. But I think for me, always being a serious musician, it was like I saw that coming. And from one standpoint, I could see that coming, but just based on the attitudes of the people at the time. And I saw how that overall scene, and we can take it even to the overall indie scene, like the overall, like, you know, storied indie scene of the early 2000s, and how dead it is now.
Really?
I think that it says a lot about, like, the level of seriousness that goes on in that scene about music in general. It says a lot about the individuals, some of the individuals in that scene, about their seriousness about and worldview, ultimately, about music and about being a creative person, being a musician.
So I guess, what's the DC scene currently? Is it still kind of, I guess, dead, people come and go? And like, what do you see like the future of DC being, of like the DC music scene?
I mean, like I said, yeah, it's always going to be a come and go city. That's sort of the nature of it. Despite that, yes, there are a lot of people that are from DC. Like that's one of the overall, like, narratives of negation that goes along with gentrification, essentially. Washington, D.C. is the most gentrified major city in the United States. The most intensely gentrified city in the United States.
That's wild. I didn't know that.
And it's something that you can feel walking down the street. Something you can feel driving around. You know, that I can talk a lot about that, but in terms of the scene today, the music scene today, for me in Washington, D.C., it's Rhizome. Rhizome is an independent music community art space that I think, as opposed to a lot of the other DIY situations in DC and in a lot of places even, whereas the overall music was, you know, punk rock or like indie rock or like some sort of rock adjacent thing that has a pathway also to commercial success, to being signed to a major label and doing all these sorts of things. There's a pathway for these underground musics to be commercially viable, whereas the community that Rhizome serves is the fledgling experimental community. And so I think the fact that it became what it became, to me, is made even more profound because it mainly serves the experimental community. Not just of Washington, D.C., but of, you know, of the nation at this point, internationally at this point.
Well,
It's an organically developed, experimental, focused DIY venue.
That's so cool. And you said that's Rhizome?
Yes.
So I guess with like Baltimore being so close, I know Baltimore as well has like a pretty active music scene. Did that like come into play with like the DC scene at all?
For me, or just in general?
I guess like just in general, or for you at all?
I mean, I can tell you my experience was that, to be honest, when I first moved to DC, I was going to Baltimore a lot, because at the time, a lot of the bands or like a lot of the music that I wanted to see would come to Baltimore and not come to DC. And I think at the time there was sort of it was like DC was a bad word in like the people being so fucking cool community.
Really?
So sorry if I swore on there.
You're chilling.
Just like the greater like hipster scene.
Yeah.
I mean,
so it was like, Baltimore is very much that scene. And I remember, especially in Laughing Man days, it was like, Baltimore is where it's at. Baltimore is where all the grungy, punky, hipstery, cool kids go. And DC is not the place to be.
Yeah.
That's changed. I can say with some assurance that that's changed. And for me, again, going to a lot of the shows early on, and also being involved in the experimental community, playing at the Red Room, ultimately playing the High Zero Festival in Baltimore, and just continuing to be part of that community, the High Zero Collective in Baltimore. I think also a very important showing of artistic and organizational independence.
That's cool.
Based around experimental music. Again.
That's interesting. So I guess going more towards like your work, I'm a big fan of like all your work and like performances and stuff. And looking at your Discogs, your catalog of work is like pretty expansive. You were in like a bunch of different projects. And I guess just like briefly touching on a few, how did you come into contact with Moor Mother?
So that was through Laughing Man days. Early on, we were so Moor Mother Kamei was in a band called the Mighty Paradox, which was in a way they were like our sister band. Laughing Man is an all black male rock band, indie rock band, and the Mighty Paradox was an all women, femmes of color rock-ish band, and so they were like our sister band in a way.
That's cool.
And so we linked up then. Kamei also started her Rockers series in Philly, and then started getting involved with the Afrofuturist affair, and so which was during that time. I was also, that was a wave in itself, the Afrofuturist deal, and so we basically have been exchanging art and artworks and following each other for since that time, which was over 10 years ago now. I had her, I did a number of shows for her in DC. She did a number of shows for me in Philly. I remember when she started as Moor Mother Goddess, and following her work, I was also on the radio playing her music,
Mm-hmm.
as Moor Mother Goddess. And again, this
A
building
lot
now
of that stuff is gone. A lot of it's extremely hard to find, and I know because she did a waiting room cover, I think in 2015 or 16.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was all on SoundCloud.
Mm.
A lot of it was on SoundCloud, and yeah, then she made the transition from Moor Mother Goddess to just Moor Mother.
Yeah, so I guess it was like only natural for you guys to start a band then after just, collaborating for so long already. So
yeah, it was natural.
I mean, also, I guess in between a lot of this time, you yourself were blogging. You've been doing stuff with Capital Bop for
Mm-hmm.
possibly a decade, and I saw last night at least they made their fund drive, and they will be continuing for another year.
You saw that? Okay, cool. Yeah.
Congratulations.
It's been 10 years. Yeah, for sure.
But
actually, that it's been 10 years almost to the day.
Wow.
That our that we started the DC Jazz Loft,
mm-hmm.
which started at Gold Leaf, which was the DIY warehouse rehearsal space that Laughing Man had, and we were putting on shows, different, like, I think each of us individually had our own focus. So Brandon, the guitar player, was he was very much like down to continue the punk thing, to continue the indie rock punk identity of the spot, whereas I wanted to reintroduce jazz to that conversation, because also at the time I'm working at a jazz community jazz radio station, Jazz and Justice radio station.
I think I saw you referred to that as your graduate school.
Yeah, for sure. Working there and being there, I got an education that is one of a kind, for sure. And also like doing intense research independently at the same time on specifically community orchestras, community organizations around the music. Horace Tapscott specifically was a huge focus and influence. But also like the loft scene in New York, and the Strata and Tribe organizations in Detroit, AACM, Chicago, and New York. Various other outfits like this that are part of the greater Black arts movement of the 60s and 70s and 80s up into today, although a lot of that has gone by the wayside for various reasons. But anyway, I was deeply invested in that at the time, in researching that. And what I saw and what I experienced also was, in the national conversation about DIY, this music had been completely written out of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's almost as if DIY was invented by white punk kids in various places.
Uh-huh.
When in fact it goes back even further. It really goes back to jazz musicians in various places, not just New York, but in a lot of places. Specifically where people almost in like the same sort of situations of a funky warehouse, or like something like that, where in the 70s that was going down. Like one profound story to me was about Ornette Coleman,
Mm-hmm.
who in the 60s got an abandoned school that he was going to turn into a performance space, was going to give lessons, all these things. It sounds very similar to a lot of the various like DIY outfits that were coming in during that time. But except Ornette, you know, in the 60s gets kidnapped and tortured in his own place. And ultimately, like, you know, he has to leave that spot because it's too dangerous.
Yeah.
And they're not like, I don't care who you are, who's Ornette Coleman, give me that saxophone, and like, you got some more money in here.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's what happened. You know, so like people and other crazy things like that happen with other people. Like, people literally put their lives on the line to make to push the music forward, which is a crucial part of the DIY conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not, yes, some of the punk kids put their lives on the line, but not in the way that Ornette Coleman did. I don't think. Not in the way that Rashid Ali did. Not in the way that Juma Sultan did. You know, I think that, so for me, 10 years ago, starting the DC Jazz Loft was a way to reintroduce independent original jazz music into that DIY conversation, as well as for the jazz community, showing in contemporary times a way where you can be original and you can play in a place that's not a stuffy jazz club that costs too much money, where you can engage with an audience that is in a setting where the information and the art can be felt in a more immediate way, in the same way that the art is felt in, you know, at the classic punk show at the DIY venue. That can still happen for music that, in my opinion, is more innovative, more immediate to the, or more vital, and speaks more directly to to social injustice, to enlightenment, to innovation musically, to sound. So putting that back into the conversation on both ends, into jazz and also into the overall indie scene.
Well, I guess like reading on your website, and we mentioned already briefly that you're involved at WPFW, and I feel like that's like what kind of like struck me with your music as a musician, because like I feel like it's always cool to see someone that's like involved in their like local radio station as well as like their scene. How did you get involved in community radio? Like, how did you know this was a thing you wanted to do?
I actually didn't know it was a thing I wanted to do until I got there. I was studying audio production actually in college, and so, you know, it was my way of like getting an internship in a related field, and also in a focus, in an area of focus that I had passion for, which was jazz.
So is this your internship that brought you to DC then?
No.
Okay.
No. This is different.
Okay.
This was later in college. But it's funny how it happened. I was working at the time at Barnes and Noble, oddly enough, and there was a guy that working there who would ultimately become my mentor at the radio station. He was a pretty famous like radio personality and DJ on the station. Very much an elder who had deep personal experience with the music. He was in the Navy and landed in New York City in 1957, which if you're familiar with the history of the music is an important year. And so like he saw and interacted with everyone. Anybody you can think of from that period in jazz. He hung out with them, were friends with them, interacted with them, all that kind of stuff. Also, he's also from Washington, D.C. He was part of I remember him describing specifically like bebop being like, yeah, the punk rock of the day. Like it wasn't something that a lot of people were into.
Mm-hmm.
It was something for that, like mainly young kids, mainly like teenagers were into. So telling me about that, about meeting and hanging out with Charlie Parker as a teenager.
It's crazy.
And then ultimately, yeah, going to New York after the Navy, and essentially being a hustler, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Being like a member of the community, a guy on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Became a Muslim. Joined the Nation of Islam and was running with Malcolm and them, you know, in Harlem before he ultimately got assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mentor moved back to Washington, D.C. But anyway, what he taught me, like at the time I was, deeply invested in listening to and trying to learn how to play jazz. And I thought I knew something about it. But this is where my grad school thing comes in, because he took my level of knowledge to unknown places.
Mm-hmm.
He hit me to music that I still don't hear a lot of people very traditional, like not traditional, but like very, straight ahead jazz music, that like historical stuff that I still don't hear people talking about today, or like that I heard people, start to venerate, years and years later.
Mm-hmm.
He was my first major mentor in that, and he also brought me to the station, and I was his intern, and it was through him where I first uttered my first words on the radio, on FM radio.
That's amazing.
Wow.
When I went there, I only wanted to just be an engineer person, which I ultimately became, like an engineer, like basically the lead engineer and production coordinator / manager, and because I was the only one there for a long time. But yeah, he started that jazz education, and he showed me also that you could achieve a level of mastery in the music without necessarily playing an instrument. Like I would consider him to be a master in the music. His instrument, so to speak, quote unquote, was the radio console.
Yeah.
And there were others at the station who showed me that as well. People like Bobby Hill, specifically, definitely used the radio console as an instrument, and that was very profound to me. And also like launched I don't know if that's on my Discogs, but I did a number of sort of like radio art projects.
Like collage type deal, or
collage and collages, mashups. Also specifically like working with a portable radio and playing the sounds from it and hooking it up to an electronics rig and patching it through and all these sorts of things.
Wow, that's super amazing.
So yeah, it was the start of my grad school. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I guess I like is that there's the mentioning or kind of framing it as grad school, but it's just community radio, or then the emphasis on doing stuff with Capital Bop or getting actual community DIY spaces, because a lot of this music seems to be continually disappearing into academia and
Mm-hmm.
not actually, it doesn't have to be treated like that. A
Mm-hmm.
question that I've got, because reading a lot of stuff with you, you always emphasize improv being the core of what you're working under. And
Mm-hmm.
two works that really struck out to me were Works for Upright Bass that you did on Astral Spirits in 2018, and then Black Myths 2.
Mm-hmm.
Complete. What is the improvisational approach to two starkly different pieces? One that someone on Bandcamp thinks is like 21st century Buddhist music, and then another that is really, I think, a great piece of post-hardcore.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say it works for upright bass and amplifier. I think that's very key because it's I'm using the very typical setup of an upright bass and an amplifier, except I'm using the amplifier as an instrument in engaging feedback techniques, again, being influenced by like, the typical noise, no input mixer setup, but using that in this fashion with an upright bass and an amplifier, using the bass as like the noise source, so to speak, quote unquote, and manipulating the amplifier itself to access different timbres and pitches, and also the movement that's employed with the bass and the amplifier that makes it musical to me, that makes it dynamic rather than just like a sine wave, essentially. So yeah, there's with that with that recording, going into that recording, there's another one coming out next year also.
Sick.
But going in,
Astral Spirits?
on Astral Spirits, yes. But going into that recording was after like a year and a half or so of playing that live and basically figuring out things to do. And I developed what I call improvisational structures, which is just like a vibe, or what I call like a vibe or a sound or a zone that you can improvise within, but it has a very distinctive character. So there's that's the idea behind that in terms of improvisation. In Blacksmiths 2 and 1, they were indeed predetermined, again, improvisational structures that we made in the studio. It was all live, no overdubs, no nothing, and some very light editing, and that's what you hear on the record. And I would say that improvisation, I think, and I've written about this, I've talked about it, that improvisation, I feel, is and I think this is also my key point in what I was talking about before, and what I've been alluding to in this whole conversation, in terms of like, punk versus whatever, not even versus, but like, I'll say the limitations of some of that music is the fact that improvisation is uniquely positioned as an artistic approach to instill change, be that social change, personal change, be that musical innovation, because by its very nature, obviously, you're engaged in something that has never happened before and will never happen again. Mm-hmm. It's the approach, the singularly positioned to offer something new, to offer a new way of thinking and being, whatever that may be. So based on that, I feel that improvisation is an exploration into the depths of humanity, as well as looking towards how we can move ourselves forward, how we can move the music forward. If you go in it with that intention, it's all about intention also. So not all, but some of it is about intention also, and about combination and spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the one, in my opinion, and again, I've written about this and talked about it a lot, is that it's uniquely positioned in this way. It's the one approach, the one artistic approach that makes that apparent. And when you really think about it, when you're writing a song, you're improvising. When you're quote unquote composing, you're improvising.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking of things. You're allowing your mind to process information. And then maybe you're writing it down, or you're gonna hum it, or you're gonna get it out there in some kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
Even that process is improvisation. And if you think about the musics that where that's the core, it's the basis of modern music, essentially. From the blues to, to all the things that the blues developed in itself,
Mm-hmm.
all the offshoots of the blues. Improvisation. It's all improvisation. It's the root of it all. Even going to Bach and Beethoven, they were improvising.
Mm-hmm.
Baroque music, Mozart, variations are nothing but improvisations.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's I like to talk about it in that sense, because I do genuinely feel the power of it,
Mm-hmm.
the immediacy, the impact of improvisation and its potential for changing the world,
Yeah.
changing ourselves. It at least offers the opportunity to do that. With that thought process and that approach, it offers the opportunity more so than any other approach, in my opinion.
I've seen Moor Mother also again speak to that as well, talking about, I think it was a 2016 gig that would have been for noise against kind of women's violence, and just coming out of that sense, being able to process something in the moment, and then a day later, it just hitting to a magnitude she hadn't comprehended.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, before we should probably go into Exposure Quintet, the only other thing I guess I'm really curious about is your approach with electronics. Again, I'm assuming just same, like, is there any kind of your,
Just about like my approach to electronics, I guess.
has it being also kind of modified just working with Moor Mother, because so much of what she's been doing has been consistently just, I think, playing around with an iPad to make really fascinating webs of sound.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, she's used a bunch of stuff. And again, we've developed like parallel to each other. I've been working with electronics since I was in high school.
Mm.
Oh yeah.
And in fact, one other avenue of development was in high school. I became, sort of engaged more so through my, so I was raised only child, single mother, with no like immediate family in Mississippi. All of my immediate family was in Detroit. So I spent my Christmas time and summertime, whatever, in Detroit. And hanging out with my cousins and my uncle, who was the same age as I. And we were really down with, you know, underground hip hop at the time, like the Talib Kweli, Black Star, Most Def, you know, that whole
Classics.
yeah, the classics, like late 90s or underground hip hop type stuff. Around it also like early high school, like all of these things happen like concurrently also, like the punk stuff, the hip hop stuff, the electronic stuff, blah 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 blah. All of these things are happening at the same time. So it's like I inherited my grandmother's like tiny vinyl collection, and that kind of like corresponded to my interest in underground hip hop at the time. I'm also playing the bass at the time, bass guitar. You know, that's how I was in a punk band, and also playing saxophone in the marching band. There was no jazz band, and so just engaged in a lot of like music coming at me at a lot of being inspired by it, by a lot of different things. So I got the vinyl. I inherited my grandmother's small vinyl collection, which started me to, identify as like a vinyl collector, like a digger, so to speak. So I got like deeply engaged in that process and that whole culture of like crate digging. You know what I mean? In high school, I was messing around with like, you know, pirated versions of Fruity Loops and Reason. And I ultimately saved up enough money working at Winn-Dixie and delivering pizzas to buy a brand new MPC 1000.
Big.
And at that point, I was, you know, it was like, actually before that, I had, because, you know, in order to play the vinyl stuff that my grandmother had given me, I had to get a turntable because there was none in the house. Mm-hmm. I got like the DJ set up, like and I was like practicing, you know, DJ stuff, like scratching, and I was more so into like the turntablism scratch. Mm-hmm. That was a thing that I was definitely into. And then later I got the MPC, and you know, just from the very first drum loop that I sampled, I was like, there it is. Like that's what I've been missing. And I think this also goes along with like maybe the conversation about like there not being a cultural, like an overbearing cultural force that's telling you what to do, because I didn't know anything like about how hip hop was made. Like it was literally trial and error, to where like, oh, I think hip hop is made because of these DJs like doing some stuff on the turntables. And then it was like, oh, okay, they're just scratching and like mixing and stuff like that. So I was learning how to do that. And then like, you know, I was also super into like Aphex Twin and Square Pusher. So like trying to make like some sort of like electronic music like that on the computer. Yeah. Because I learned that a lot of the album Drux specifically was made on the computer. So I was like, okay, if the computer is, and it made sense to me in the fact that like, if I'm going to be using a computer, then it should be crazy. You know what I mean? Like it shouldn't be just like some simple thing. Like it should be crazy, because there's the opportunity for it to be crazy. And you know, people like Aphex Twin is making it crazy. So like, let me try and do that. And then, so then I also like had the approach in hip hop being influenced specifically like by people like Madlib and like Pete Rock, like the very classic like crate digger sample approach type people, but also not wanting to go the SP route, because that's what they were doing. And I was like, I'm gonna do the MPC because not so many people are like, a lot of people obviously like classic style had the MPC 2000, but the MPC 1000 at the time had recently come out, like maybe a few years before I got it. And I was like, okay, this is something where I can like, still be influenced by Madlib and the SP users, but do something different. So like probably through my college career as an audio production student was very much engaged in doing that. I was in Washington DC also. There was also like, it was also the time of I was just thinking about this today about it was when I was getting into it, it was like right at the transition where it was like, I got my turntables, but then everybody's talking about like, oh, I'm going to Serato, and like, Serato had just come out, and like there was this whole, there was that debate happening of like, electronic computer stuff versus the real quote unquote crate diggers, bringing their vinyls and like, really knowing the music and all that kind of stuff. People using hardware, MPCs and SPs versus Fruity Loops, that whole conversation, Kanye West versus, whoever. And like, in the context of the underground hip hop scene, like the first time I ever was able, again, in DC was the first time I was able to see real jazz for the first time, and the first time I was able to see real hip hop for the first time, real underground hip hop for the first time. With the ciphers and like, people scratching and like, trading original beats and all that kind of stuff. I was like, that was my thing at the time. I was doing beat battles and, putting out little beat tapes and things like this.
That's it.
And like, very much engaged in like, I would say my other graduate school is the hip hop approach, which is like learning samples and like digging in the crates and all that kind of stuff like that. The hip hop process will take your music IQ to exponential levels. So that was another thing, was doing all that, crate digging and like making beats in a like very methodical, practiced sort of way. To be honest, I eventually got pretty disillusioned with the overall trends of hip hop and also like the local scene. And so like I was still making beats. I still make beats. I still make beats and stuff. But I found that I was able to apply that concept and that process to noise essentially, and to like experimental electronic music. And that's when I joined the band Mom Squared, Mind Over Matter, Music Over Mind, which is it's a noise, electronic noise trio essentially.
That's tight.
And I was playing the MPC, like using the samples that I had made for like hip hop oriented beats, but just in this other context.
That's sick. You incorporated that into like noise music. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Good deconstruction.
Yeah. So that was that whole thing. I forget what the original question was though.
Literally, that was your approach to electronics. You went into it. That was...
Yeah. So yeah. My approach to electronics. Yeah. And so So like, yeah, my approach is the hip hop approach
That's
essentially.
so sick.
But I wasn't always like married to the boom bap,
Yeah.
so to speak. I early Flying Lotus, like the first album.
Hmm.
1983.
Exactly. You know, Madlib, obviously, Dilla to a lesser extent, but Madlib for sure. And you know, that whole approach of again achieving mastery through music, but from not necessarily like playing an instrument, but your music IQ is off the charts.
Yeah.
Just through that process, through that crate digging process, is a thing that really struck home for me. And yeah, hip hop is electronic music, just for the record. But I was also interested in expanded sounds in hip hop and in electronic music necessarily. So,
That's
yeah.
sick. So I guess we're getting close to wrapping up the show here. I guess shout out some stuff you've been digging currently, some homies, like whatever you want to shout out.
Oh,
Homies,
yeah.
books, whatever you got.
Whatever.
Want to get.
Shout outs. I should have made a list. Let's see. Just immediately, well, I'm gonna shout out Amertha because we're gonna be working to. This is my appointment.
Oh, tight.
To Amertha Kadambi.
Sick.
Shout outs to the homie Kyle Modal, who's a bass player, a very gifted bass player based in Florida. We're gonna link up in a second. Big shouts to heroes or gang leaders and all the crew, you know, of that ensemble.
Tight.
Big ups to Irreversible Entanglements, Moor Mother, Kier Neuringer, Chaser Holmes, Aquiles Navarro, the whole crew. Let's see, big shouts to Arts for Art in New York, holding down real free jazz for over 20 years, for almost 30 years, withholding the true legacy of free jazz in New York. Big shouts to Patricia Parker, big shouts to Miriam Parker, another wonderful and very important to me collaborator. Big ups to Pat Kane of Model Home. Let's see. Big ups to Devin Braja Waldman, also of the New York MacDougall crew. Big ups to Jamie Branch, trumpet player, close friend and collaborator. Big ups to, you said Laughing Man, big ups to Brandon Moses, and big ups to Michael Andrew Harris, who's a real deal family man down in Raleigh, North Carolina. Who else did we talk about in this conversation? Oh yeah, more Mom Square. Big ups to Thomas Stanley, Bushmeat, AD. Big ups to Bobby Hill. Who else did we talk about? Yeah, big ups to Ian Mackay.
Hell yeah.
Big ups to Ian, and Ian Savonius too, the other Ian. Big ups to Priest, big ups to the homie Gideon, to Katie Alice Greer, and also to Danielle, and big ups to Gauche, another amazing DC punk band, contemporary DC punk band. Big ups to Marxist Narrows, Ian McComb, and Jared Gilgore of Heart of the Ghosts. Who else? Oh yeah, Baltimore. Big ups to High Zero, John Byrne and Martin and the whole crew at High Zero. Big ups to Jamal Moore of a very important brother and collaborator, one of the deepest brothers I know, in fact, and should definitely be more so in this whole jazz conversation, especially after this Kamasi Washington business. To big up to Jamal Moore of Ancestral Duo. Yeah.
Dude, that was an amazing shout out. It was probably one of the best ones I've had.
So much knowledge there. Thomas, you know the question you got to ask.
Yeah, so I actually have like one more question before we head out here.
Yes.
It's kind of a big one. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
Are you sure?
You're making it bigger by with the anticipation.
So a rat is going to jump into your mouth. Do you want this rat to jump into your mouth head first, or do you want it to jump butt first, and why?
Well, why would it jump butt first? Don't rats
it like fell. You know that Ratatouille scene where it like fell from like the roof?
But that's falling, not jumping.
That's true. I gotta reword it.
I hate rats. I would close my mouth. I'd spit it out and stomp on it, maybe.
Hey, there it is, dude. That's the simple answer. That's good.
Sweet.
So that's great. My personal favorite was probably like the vegan option, I always say. But you know, if this thing jumps into your mouth, you gotta let it go butt first so you can calm it down, pet its head, let that thing crawl into your hat, and then you have a homie to help you cook dinner at night.
Nah, I'm good. I don't need help from rats. I'm good.
Anyways, yeah, so that's about all we have for today. Thanks for tuning in to TBD on KCSB FM 91.9 every Sunday, 4 to 6 p.m. and NetNet Radio every Saturday, 8 to 10 p.m. This has been Luke Stewart. Thanks so much, Luke.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining me, Maddy.
It was great to be here.
Thanks, Maddy.
Thank you so much, Luke. Cannot wait to find your tapes if they ever come back in stock again. Again, Quintet slaps. Please listen to Special Interest. Nice. If you haven't heard Special Interest, you might want to check those guys out. They're doing something very
at the end of the year.
You're right behind Bill Nace for me.
Oh yeah. Homie Bill Nace. Shouts to Bill Nace.
Hell yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Shouts to Brandon Lopez. Shouts to Steve Beskowski. Who else? That's it.
So
NYC Noise.
Hell yeah.
Shouts to Weasel.
No Fun Fest.